Hi, folks, and we are live again with Strange Journeys. Welcome to the trip. I am Tom, your ghost host, and we've got Lewis over here somewhere. There he is,
Yes,
fading in and out.
yes. My cat was attacking my feet.
Oh, don't you hate it when that happens? Oh, I got to print out. I got to print out my outline this time. Oh, there's
Oh,
Tim.
good.
I think. Hang on, there's Tim. Okay.
Hey, Tim.
Yep, we
Hey,
got Tim and Lewis to help me out today. How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Yeah,
all right.
he scooted right on in here. I told Lewis, I said, Tim will probably show up during the intro like he usually does.
Right.
But we are here for Strange Journeys, folks. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being one of the watchers. Where'd it go? I keep losing it. There it is. Thank you for being one of the watchers. We provide these shows first and foremost for you, the watchers, for your entertainment. We are not by any means and do not claim to be scholars or experts in any of the topics we cover, especially today because none of us are from Ireland. At this point in time, we may have
Right.
forebears. We may have forebears that were from Ireland, and I'll tell you my little story on that in a second. But we're simply enthusiasts and storytellers who have fun with these topics while doing our best to respect individual beliefs. And please remember that this show is live. Nothing is rehearsed or edited out later. What you see is what you get. The only caveat to that is our revisited shows where I do have to edit them down for time. But that's it. Speaking of, our last revisited show was How Big the Foot 2, our split episode there. We finished up the How Big the Foot part 2, not to be confused with the How Big the Foot 2 that we've recently done. This is the first show split into two. But I usually do part 1 and part 2 on those as well. But that was our last revisit show. Hope you can catch that on YouTube. We have a special playlist of just our revisit show where you catch the edits. Our last live stream, who remembers? Our last live
I think
stream.
I was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strange States, Georgia.
Yes.
And we had a good time on that one. Lewis had some great stories. And go back and catch that one on YouTube. I think it's on Facebook. We had an issue, and I never told anybody about it. But music I use for our little intros to the shows, I usually get them from YouTube Music. And what is that clicking I keep hearing? So, but anyway, I get it from YouTube, and I get the copyright permission from YouTube as well, the permission
Right.
to use it. So I had put that on our YouTube video, but I forgot to go put it on our Facebook video, copy of it. And so Facebook stalled the video and said, we're editing out this because of, some Sony Music Corporation said I didn't have permission to use their music. And I'm like, well, I got permit. That's what
Right.
YouTube Music is there. I mean, I don't know. It's not strictly YouTube Music. It's music downloads through YouTube. So anyway, I disputed it and put in there the copyright info that gave me permission, and they came back a few days later and says, okay, we were wrong. We didn't change anything, so you're good to go. And I was like, okay. So that little drama was taken care of. All right, our next revisit show next Saturday is going to be the first part of our second ghost hunting show. So check that out next week. And then in 2 weeks, our another Strange States. We're going to go ahead with the one my brain has been wanting me to do since we started. Remember I told you last time? It's Mississippi. So Beth, if you're watching, 2 weeks. Beth lives in South Mississippi. So Beth, if you're watching, 2 weeks. I put a little texting our group a while ago saying, all right, Beth, we miss you. And Tommy up in Tennessee, we miss him too. We haven't had them on the show in a while. So hopefully they can be back in 2 weeks. All right, Tim, we got to do our promos here real quick before we get into the show. If you're watching on YouTube, remember, what are you supposed to do?
Click that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.
That's all you got to do. So, and if you can help us produce this show, we got a new patron this past week or two, and we certainly appreciate all of you that are patrons helping us out on Patreon. And every little bit helps. So if you can help us there, we'd certainly appreciate it. And another way to support the show is strangestuff.live. Tim, if you could throw up that banner for us. It's our merch site with all kinds of show-specific merch that you can buy, T-shirts. We try to show pictures of it. Strange Journeys T-shirt, coffee mugs, pillows. And if you are a regular watcher, you can be one of the watchers and get stuff from us at Strange Journey Stuff. Now, one thing I want to mention before we actually get into the show is one thing that we've been talking about behind the scenes. We haven't done it yet, but we're working on it. We're compiling stories for a new 5 to 10 minute show. And if you've been watching our revisited shows, I've been trying to throw in a little teaser clip on those. We're compiling stories, and we'll start recording soon. And they will be pre-recorded. They will not be live, but there'll be one, well, like that said, one dark night. It's going to be a late night show, and it'll be one strange tale. Now, one thing we've decided is that we're not necessarily going to tell true stories.
Right.
We're going to tell spooky stories and leave it up to you to decide whether they're true or not. So some of them will be, some of them may not be. So, but whatever. So be looking for Night Treks coming up soon. All right. Well, let me get over here. It's time to get into the Irish cryptids. You know, as we approach March 17, which is the day when everyone is considered to be Irish for the day, I posted a map of Ireland. Let me pull it up here in our Strange Friends group. I posted this the mythical beast of Ireland. I thought it was a fun, cute little thing. And then I got to thinking, you know, why not do a show on Irish cryptids? So I was toying that idea around in my head, and then one of our regular watchers, Greg, commented on the post and said, "Hey, when are y'all going to do a show on Irish cryptids?" And I was like, "Next show." So anyway, that just kind of cemented the idea there. So here we go. Let's take a strange journey to Ireland as we start with probably the most well-known Irish cryptid. Uh-oh. Tim popped out for a second. The most well-known Irish cryptid or mythological creature, the Banshee. Now, in Irish, in the old Irish, it has a unique spelling. It's B-E-A-N, like the English bean, S-I-D-H-E. Now, I would recommend, if you're a reader and you like historical fantasy fiction, my favorite author is a man named Stephen Lawhead. And Stephen Lawhead has written the Pendragon Cycle, which is his retelling of the Arthurian legend. And book 2 of that series, that cycle, is called Merlin. And it's the story of how Merlin came to be. Again, it's his own retelling of the story. But in that story, Merlin is lost as a child, and he's taken in by a clan of Beansidhe or Sidhe. And in reading the books, I always put it as, trying to pronounce that. I never connected it, but it is actually pronounced Banshee. Now, I would love to have him on the show and get his thoughts on how he included the Banshee into his stories. But the word literally means woman of the fairy mound or fairy woman. It is a female spirit in Irish folklore who heralds the death of a family member, usually by wailing, shrieking, or keening. The word keen comes from the Gaelic word, and Lewis and I were talking about this before. We can't pronounce Gaelic. The Gaelic word is Caoineadh. It means to cry or to weep. And I wish Lynn was able to be with us today because she loves Gaelic and was even taking a course one time on learning to speak Gaelic. And we even got our wedding bands. I don't know if you can see it there, but our wedding band, well, it's not, the glare's coming up. No, it's not coming clear. It's not. But if I remember correctly, and I'll probably get in trouble, but it means my heart, one heart, one life, something like that. But anyway, we have matching bands that are in Gaelic. That's how much she loves the Gaelic. Before we get on into the story, let me say that I mentioned earlier that where none of us are currently from Ireland. We don't live in Ireland right now. And I was raised with the understanding that I was second generation Irish all of my life. As a teenager, I had maps of Ireland on my wall, and I would look for it to see where our family came from, and this kind of thing. My mother had told me that her father was born in Ireland and had moved to the States when he was 5 years old. And I was like, cool. Oh, Tim's back. Tim's back. Okay. But I had been told all my life that my grandfather was born in Ireland and his family moved to the States when he was 5 years old. So I grew up believing I was Irish. Well, a few years back, Lynn got me a subscription, or we got a subscription to Ancestry.com. And so I started tracing my lineage back to my grandfather. Found out he was born in Greene County, Mississippi. and I went back to his father, and he was born in central Mississippi, and his father before that was born in Mississippi. And the closest I could come was several generations back. They were from England.
Right.
And so I was like, Mama, we're not Irish. She's like, well, son, I'm
Right.
sorry. That's what I was always told. I'm like, we're not Irish. I guess her dad was wanted to be Irish. I don't know. But
Right.
anyway, you got a lot of different versions of the Banshee, but there's two major things that everyone tends to agree on. It appears to be a woman, and it's one of the most terrifying creatures from Irish folklore. But when you dig down on it, I guess you could say terrifying, but it's more of a comforting thing in the sense that they attach themselves to a family and alerts the family if there's going to be a death. Let's see. It is believed that much of the legend of the Banshee stems from the fact that women, we talked about keening earlier, there were women who would practice keening or perform keening at a funeral. And some of them were actually paid to come in and do that. And so the fact that it was women doing the keening, they kind of, some believe that that's where the Banshee legend came from. The main difference, though, is that the Banshees do their keening before death and the women do it after death. So how that got looped over, I don't know. But let's see. Some say that the Banshee also sings, but that appears to come to the link to the keening women. And so, but some say she's a short old woman with long dirty hair. Others say she appears as a tall woman wearing a gray cloak over a green dress. One feature of her appearance tends to remain constant is her eyes. The Banshees are said to be roaring red, caused by her constant tears. All right, I got this from the IrishRoadTrip.com, an article by Keith O'Hara on the Banshee. He said many years ago, an elderly relative told him that a spirit or fairy appears only to someone in a particular family. The story went that only those from the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Neills, the Kavanaghs, and the O'Grady families could hear the cry of the Banshee. I don't know why they were picking on those families.
Right.
They went on to say that if a person from a different family married someone from one of those families, they'd also be able to hear the spirit. So, depending on which legend you hear, and could lead to Lewis's Banshee story from North Carolina, didn't you say?
Yes. This is a very old story from the area around Tarboro, North Carolina. And Tarboro is located on the Tar River. And the story goes back to just before the American Revolution, when an Irishman by the name of David Warner moved to the area and built a mill on the banks of the Tar River. And this gentleman, as time went on, was very successful. And he eventually, as talk of war began to erupt in that part of North Carolina around the beginning of the American Revolution, he decided that he would support the Patriots. He had no love for the British, and so he ramped up the operations of his mill to support the American Patriot cause in that area. So, as war continued through the years, he became a wanted man among the British. And eventually, when the British arrived in that area, they sent out scouts, and the scouts were given the task of looking for this David Warner. So, David Warner had already been warned that the British wanted his head, so he he basically was quite obstinate and said, I'm going to stay here. I mean, if they want me dead, then I will die in the patriot cause. So he continued working his mill for the patriot cause, and so when these um, five scouts showed up, he actually saw as they approached the mill, and he specifically cried out, even though he was the only person working there. He cried out something to the effect of, make sure that every drop of grain reaches General Nathaniel Greene. And after saying that, the scouts rushed in and they seized him. And so this was a great big guy. It took all five of the scouts' power
Wow.
to subdue him, and they tied him up, and he let out a curse. He said, "You realize that I can summon a banshee and that she will avenge my death should you kill me." Well, the British soldiers kind of ignored that. They took him down to the Tar River, loaded him onto a rowboat there, and they rowed him out into the middle of the river, and they tied a huge millstone around his neck
Mm.
and dropped the millstone in the water and threw him overboard. So as they're standing there watching the last of the bubbles of the miller's air, um, this spirit began to form right above the water, and this
Wow.
spirit eventually transformed into a woman, and she began screaming and howling. And
Wow.
so the British soldiers were incredibly frightened by this. They quickly rowed the boat back to shore and kind of ran screaming off into the woods, um, pursued by the sound of this woman's screaming and keening.
Uh-huh.
And so they were very frightened, and they decided to not tell their general what had happened. So the next day, the general arrives at the mill, finds it empty, and decides to set up camp right there along the river. So as nightfall fell, the the screaming starts up again on the
Wow.
river. And of course, all these British soldiers are just fascinated, and all these people ran down to the river to look for whatever was causing the sound. And so the soldiers who were responsible went and hid, and they eventually decided, I think we need to go tell our general what we did. So they went to the general and told him that, we killed this miller here, and that he threatened to summon a banshee. And the general was so outraged that he ordered that the men stay and continue working the mill, those responsible for the miller's death,
Yeah.
while the rest of that regiment left. And so the next day, the regiment left, and the men had to stay there and continue working this mill. Well, the first night, they're working the mill, and after nightfall, the screaming starts up, and all of a sudden, one of them turns around and sees the banshee standing at the door of the mill. And she
Wow.
comes into the mill. She goes up to one of the soldiers, and suddenly he is taken under her spell. And he ends up kind of walking zombie like out of the mill and out the door and into the woods. And so every preceding night, the banshee would appear and take one of the soldiers until just one soldier was left.
Wow.
And then that night, as he was left, the screaming starts up again, and he is supposed to have run screaming into the woods, never to be seen again.
Wow.
Um, and they still say that as a warning to when the river will flood, that the
Uh-huh.
Banshee has been heard screaming, still screaming to this day on the Tar
Wow.
River.
Wow. Oh man. And that's in North Carolina.
Yes, Tarboro, North Carolina,
Okay.
in Edgecombe County.
We may have to do Strange North Carolina soon.
Right.
Yes, indeed. I've
And
got some North Carolina stories.
I know you do. I know you do. Oh wow. All right. Supposedly the first mention of a banshee was in 1649 by Sir Richard. Well, the story goes Sir Richard Fanshawe and his wife Anne lived in Cork, Ireland, and the city rose up against the English king in October of that year, and they were forced to flee. And they were on their way to Spain, and they would stay with friends on their way to Spain. For 3 nights, they stayed at the castle of Lady Honora O'Brien. And on their first night there, around 1 a.m., Lady Fanshawe was awakened by a voice at the window of the room they were staying in. She got up, drew the curtain open, only to discover a woman leaning into the casement of the window from outside. The figure was wearing white, and she had red hair and a ghastly complexion. The woman called out loudly in a strange tone, "A hone, a hone, a hone," which they didn't bring this up in this story, but I had to do some research and found that means alas. Supposedly that's the English rendering of what she was saying. Alas, alas, alas. Followed by a sigh more like wind than breath, and then she vanished more like a thick cloud than substance. Terrified by what she had seen, Lady Fanshawe woke her husband, who was surprised by what she had told him. And in the morning, Lady O'Brien told them that she had stayed up all night because a cousin of hers, whose ancestors had owned the home that they were in, had asked her to stay with him in his chamber because he was severely ill, and he eventually died at 2 o'clock that morning. She went in even further as to tell them that she had given them the best room in the house, but she had forgotten that the specter of a woman who had become pregnant by a former owner of the home and then been murdered by that owner now appeared in the window of the room when any of the family were dying. Needless to say, the Fanshaws left that morning.
Right. Yeah, I don't know I'd be willing to stay, you know.
It's time to go.
Right.
Do you one of y'all feel up to telling us about Lady Jane in the notes? I mean, I'll go over it.
I can do that.
Okay.
All right. Lady Jane Wilde, who was the mother of the famous Irish playwright Oscar Wilde, was an Irish poet who had a special interest in collecting Irish folk tales. And one of her books was Ancient Legends, Mystic Charms, and Superstitions of Ireland, with sketches of the Irish past, which was published in 1887. And this is from that. Sometimes the banshee assumes the form of some sweet singing virgin of the family who died young and has been given the mission by the invisible powers to become the harbinger of coming doom to her mortal kindred. Or she may be seen at night as a shrouded woman crouched beneath the trees, lamenting with veiled face, or flying past in the moonlight, crying bitterly. And the cry of the spirit is mournful beyond all other sounds on earth, and betokens certain death to some member of the family whenever it is heard in the silence of the night. The Banshee even follows the old race across the ocean and to distant lands for space and offer no hindrance to the mystic power which is selected and appointed to bear the prophecy of death to a family. Of this, a well authenticated instance happened a few years ago, and many now living can attest to the truth of the narrative. And this is the story that she decided to tell. A branch of the ancient race of the O'Grady's had settled in Canada, far removed, apparently, from all the associations, traditions, and mysterious influences of the old land of their forefathers. But one night a strange and mournful lamentation was heard outside the house. No word was uttered, only a bitter cry, as if one in deepest agony and sorrow floated through the air. Uh, the inquiry was made, but no one had been seen near the house at the time, though several persons distinctly heard the weird, unearthly cry, and a terror fell upon the household, as if some supernatural influence had overshadowed them. Next day, it happened that the gentleman and his eldest son went out boating. As they did not return, however, at the usual time for dinner, some alarm was excited, and messengers were sent down to the shore to look for them. But no tidings came until precisely at the exact hour of the night when the spirit cry
Wow.
had been heard the previous evening. A crowd of men was seen approaching the house, bearing with them the dead bodies of the father and the son, who had both been drowned by the accidental upsetting of the boat, within sight of land, but not near enough for any help to reach them in time. Thus the
Wow.
Banshee had fulfilled her mission of doom, after which she disappeared, and the cry of the spirit of death was heard no more.
Wow. And that was
Interesting.
we talked about five families or the families. That was the O'Grady's.
Mhm. Yes,
Right.
And the story you told from North Carolina, I wonder if they were an offshoot or married into one of these families.
it's quite
That's fun.
possible.
And oh wow. All right. We wanted to start with the most popular and most well known, the Banshee. Now we're going to talk about some lesser known, but one is actually shown up in pop culture in a sense, but in Celtic mythology, Balor, of the evil eye, is the chief of a demon race called the. That's another one of them Gaelic words, the Fomor,
Fomor.
and that threatened the Irish people until they were subdued in the Second Great Battle of Mag Tured. Now, when he was a
My
young
Torah.
boy, okay, I'll take. All right, we're gonna have to let Tim pronounce these Gaelic words then.
Some of them I can pronounce, some of them I can't, but you've got Moi
Okay.
Torah.
All right, a Moy Torah. Okay.
Right.
When Balor was a young boy, he happened to glance into a potion brewed by his father's druids, and the fumes emanating from that potion caused him to grow a huge, poisonous, evil eye. Do I have a picture of that? I've got some of Balor, but I don't know if I've got
You got
the
some
evil
Baylor. I
eye.
don't know that you've got one, the evil eye.
Yeah,
I know you've got one where he's
no.
missing his eye.
Yeah, now that one,
Oh,
like I
right.
said, made it a pop
Right in the
culture.
center of
That's
his head.
from, yeah, that's from Hellboy. The movie Hellboy, they had Balor in it.
Okay.
Balor, well, this evil eye was it had seven very heavy eyelids, so it took four strong men to open it, and this gaze killed everything within its sight. What was that? Some movie with a robot that lasers would shoot out its eye and kill everything. Anyway, Balor ruled tyrannically. Oh, this goes into okay. The Druids had prophesied that Balor's grandson would kill him, that would be his demise. So Balor took his daughter, Ethniu. Is that right, Tim?
Yeah, sounds right, Ethniel.
Okay. And imprisoned her in a tower.
On Tory Island.
Yes. And God, go ahead and read it, Tim, because I can't pronounce some of these words.
Balor's greed leads to his downfall as he stole a magical cow of fertility, the Gloss Gobelion. Yeah, some of them I can't pronounce either, so we're both doing great on this one. Which has the ability to produce copious amounts of milk. The
No, wait a
magical
minute.
cow belonged to Sion, who was the king of the mighty.
A magical cow giving copious amounts of milk. I'm sorry, I
Well,
think a magical
that's
cow
right.
did something. I mean, cows already give milk. I'd think a magical cow would, give gold milk or something. I
Right,
don't know.
something, chocolate milk, who knows? Since Sion knew the druid's prophecy, and since he was so aware of why Balor had locked his daughter in the tower, he disguises himself as a druidess and enters the tower and seduces Balor's daughter. Their union resulted in 3 children, one of whom would become Loth. When Balor discovered the plot, he ordered the children to be drowned. Only Loth would survive and was secretly raised in times of continuous conflict between the Danes and the Formians, both demonic clans which were ruled over by a tyrannic king, Balor. The Formors continued to prey upon the settlers until they were finally defeated by the Danes in the second battle of Moitora. Is that right? Yeah, Moitora. I had to go back and look again. And Balor eventually was killed by his grandson.
Yeah.
Balor has made an appearance in pop culture, like you said, in Hellboy, the Army of the Golden Army.
Yeah, that's where I went and got this picture from, but
Right.
yeah.
And
All
that
right.
child is his name is Lou, and he is celebrated in the holiday of Lunaza.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I remember that now. And as I mentioned previously, my favorite author, Stephen Lawhead, has a character in one of his books called Lou. And
Okay.
they pronounce it that way some. It's not the same one. This is a totally different character, but it's based on that, Lou. The next one we want to talk about, and Tim, how do we pronounce this? Slew?
Slew. Yeah.
The slew. Okay.
Right.
Like demons, the slew are scary creatures from Irish and Scottish folklore that hunt down souls. They're said to be dead sinners that come back as malicious spirits. They work in groups and try to enter a house where someone is almost dying to take away their soul. Since it is said they come from the west, the Irish families used to keep their west-facing windows completely shut, to keep them out. All right, the next one is one I think is going to be a lot of fun. I like this one.
The Pookas.
The Pooka. The Pooka. Only because of its name, the Pooka.
Right.
Wait, we have a comment. Huh? I don't know what that is. Some kind of YouTube bot commenting on us. So we'll go back and delete that later. Anyway, we had a comment like, whoa, and then it's one of those bots with just a couple of letters.
Right.
The Pooka is a shapeshifter. A Pooka could take the shape of an old man if it believed that appearance would benefit them, or take the form of a dog. In some stories, you'll hear it said that this creature took on the appearance of a black horse with a wild mane, whose golden eyes shone brightly. And I'm going to skip ahead because it says that when they turn into a horse, they take a drunken passenger on a terrifying trip home. The weary passenger soon realizes that something is amiss as the horse jumps over hedges and gallops around in the area in search of ways to scare the passenger. Now, as we were going over these today, and y'all know I usually sit there and watch YouTube videos on our topic just to get more of this in my head. Every instance of a Pooka showing up has to do with drunk individuals.
Right. I was just about to say, ask Lewis because he may know. I know there's a song about somebody that's an old Irish song of somebody riding a Pooka, and he's completely drunk the entire time. But I don't remember what the
I
song
don't
is
know that
anymore or
song
anything.
off the top of my head.
Uh,
So,
I don't remember it either, but this is supposedly some of the forms that the Pooka can take.
right.
Yeah. All right. And the Pooka is also known to enjoy an all yap. Is that how you say it? Or a chat.
Right.
They just want they say they have these idle benches in Irish communities, and you find them in places, uh, in many of the towns and villages where you just sit down and talk, and that's where you'll find a Pooka. You sit at the idle bench, and a Pooka may show up and just chat, talk about the weather, give
Right.
advice, just share stories. Um, and they usually initiate this. One thing I did not realize is that there was a movie that I'm sure you've heard of that one of the main characters was a Pooka.
Right. And it's only referred to, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it's only referred to as a Pooka one time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very, very brief
Well,
glimpse of it being,
wasn't it
Jimmy
his character?
Stewart calls him a Pooka,
Yeah,
at
he
one
says,
point. And
he
it's
says
one
it's a
line,
Pooka. Mm-hmm. Yep, and supposedly he took the form of a 6-foot tall rabbit.
Right.
and here's another thing: as I was digging into it, guess what his character was it Elwood or Edwood?
Elwood.
Yeah,
Elwood Dowd.
right. And he was assumed to have been an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like every instance of a Pooka showing up, there's adult beverages involved.
Well,
everyone I found.
And if you remember, the sister's like, well, we've got to get him into a sanitarium. And back then, sanitariums where you would send somebody that was an alcoholic that was well-to-do. Let's send him to a sanitarium; he'll get better.
Exactly. So I just thought, I mean, the Pooka is the fun one, and of course, if you're riding the Pooka, that could be another term for being just totally drunk. So, riding the Pooka. Now we have a new description. All right. The next one, I think we talked about, touched on it during our fairies show, but the Changeling. They were fairies who had been, the fairy parents had a baby and they would swap it out with a human baby. The child was taken at one of 3 reasons: to act as a servant, for the fairies to receive the love of a human child, or for malice or revenge. Most of the time, the exchange was made with babies, but occasionally an elderly fairy would be swapped so that it could live out its life in the comfort and care of the humans, or so that it could go ahead and die. Now, as I researched this, and I've got a whole lot more on the Changeling, but I just wanted to say, basically, it looks like this mythology came from the high infanticide rate. And I don't like to use the word infanticide because it sounds like they were being killed, but they were dying. The mortality rate was extremely high, for some of these children, and so they built this mythos around that fact and saying, well, it was a changeling baby. My baby died because it was swapped out with a fairy child, and my child is with the fairies. So that could explain a lot of where this came from. And it was easier for them to lose the child believing that they had been taken by a gang of fairies than it was to believe that they were going to let their child die. So it was a horrible yet very real aspect of rural living in the medieval world. And the fact that changeling tales often mention their ravenous appetite suggests that the parents of these unfortunate children saw them as a threat to their family's continued existence, and that allowing them to die might be the only way to save everyone else. The changeling stories just helped them down the horribly inevitable path. It was like they had, in their grief, they had to hang on to something. My
Right.
child is with the fairies. This was
Right.
not my child. And go ahead.
We're talking about a culture, though, that most of what their legends and lore deals with the fairies out there, because we do have, what is it, the Sith
Yeah.
and the Sede, and so you've got the two clans, depending on which
Yeah.
one that you're looking at. So it's really kind of
Right.
it plays a big part in, okay, my child's with the fairies. Maybe they're with the Sith. Maybe they're with the Sede. Who knows which side they went to, depending on.
Right. Well, one thing we came across this morning, Lynn and I were sitting there watching one of these videos, and they mentioned Gone with the Wind. And Lewis and I were talking about this before we came on the air. They said that a changeling was mentioned in Gone with the Wind, and Lynn stopped and corrected them. Of course, they couldn't hear her. So she was telling me, no, that's not right. It didn't happen in the Gone with the Wind book or the movie, but she said it happened in the sequel called Scarlet,
Right.
written by someone else. Lewis and I
Alexandra
looked it up before.
Ripley.
Right.
Right.
And that supposedly Scarlet and Rhett have a child, and there's issues. Scarlet is living in England Ireland at this time, and she believes that her baby is a changeling. And so I told Lynn, I said, boy, no wonder that book didn't do too well. I said, it just went way off into left field. All right, Tim, since you can pronounce it, tell us about the Cat of the Mounds.
Okay, it's a Kate Sith, and for those that don't know, Ireland is the only country in Europe that does not have wild cats. There's no breed of wild cats or no
Wow.
species that has ever existed, and so there began stories about the Kate Sith as early as the 1400s, from what I could trace, and they described it as being large in size, like a large dog, black in color, and always with a white mark across the chest, having rigid bristles across their backs. Some people would believe that they are witches or druids that had transformed themselves into cats in order to move among the fairy folk undetected. Now, interestingly, in 1965 in County Mayo, scientists recovered bones from two cats, a male and a female, from an archaeological dig. There have never been any other cat bones discovered in an archaeological dig throughout the history of Ireland. In 2006, a man by the name of John Keary claimed that he was out hunting when he shot and killed what he believed to be a fox. When he got closer, he said it was about 4 feet long, reddish brown, like a fox. It had long teeth and a long tail. The teeth protruded out of its mouth like the fangs of a saber-toothed tiger. Apparently, he didn't turn it over to a university. I guess he said that he was going to and never did, so they could look at it. Earlier, though, in the 1940s, you have a man by the name of Pat Murphy, who is an archaeologist and historian from County Mayo, who wrote that in the 1940s, his uncle and father saw one near his father's shed. The animal was trapped among the fishing nets that had been stored there, and they shot it. They described it as being very large and having a nail-like tip to its tail, like a sharp point on the end of the tail. Again, the body was never actually seen by scientists, but I thought it was interesting that here there's no known cats in Ireland other than those that were originally domestic that have gone feral.
But they supposedly found bones of a cat. It was
the bones themselves. I was looking at that particular article, and I jumped back to where the 1965. I was looking at that. They were digging in a burial mound, and the burial mound dates to about 1200 AD.
Wow!
And they're like, well, why have we never found any other ones if there were cats here? But they were really large cats too. They were talking 4 or 5 foot. So they would have been
Wow.
huge cats.
Oh my. Okay. Lewis, you want to tell us about the monkey, and I'll talk
All
about
right.
the Dobarku.
Monkey.
Monkey.
In Irish folklore, Maki is the name given to the reported mysterious creature said to inhabit the lakes of Killarney in Ireland. In 2003, scientists conducting a series of sonar scans to determine local fish populations encountered a large solid object in the water. And this has led to the theory that the lake may be inhabited by some form of a lake monster, possibly similar to the famed Nessie of Loch Ness in Scotland. It has been suggested that witnesses might have seen seals, which, when traveling in pairs, will dive and rise opposite to each other, giving the impression of being a single larger animal.
I can see that. If they're both swimming along at the same pace and one comes up and the other's right behind it, it could possibly look like that.
I was noticing this picture and I was like, oh, that's got to be a huge creature for there to be a house, and somebody standing on the back.
That's right.
And it's larger than the submarine, whatever it is underneath
Yeah.
it. So,
yeah, when I found that, I was thinking, yeah, some kid was drawing McKay.
Right.
All right. Well, I'm going to go over the Duberquet, and I think that's how they pronounce it. I was listening to a documentary on it, Duberquet. And then we're going to close out the show with Tim's family story. You're going to be intrigued by that. So the Duberquet, or the water dog, or the water hound, or the king otter, is a creature of Irish folklore that resembles both a dog and an otter, though it sometimes is described as half dog and half fish. It lives in the water and has fur with protective properties, though I never could find what those protective properties may be. The physical description resembles an otter, but it's said to be about 5 times as large, perhaps 10 to 15 feet, with a white pelt, black ear tips, and a black cross on its back. A headstone found in Cornwall Cemetery in Glenade County, Leitrim, depicts the Dobarku and is related to the tale of an attack on a local woman by the creature. I've got a picture of that, the headstone. The stone is claimed to be the headstone of a grave of a woman killed by the Dobarku in the 17th century. Let's see. It shows a recumbent animal having the body and legs like those of a dog, with the characteristic depth of rib and strength of thigh. The tail, long and curved, shows a definite tuft. Now, the woman is supposedly Grace McLaughlin. Her husband supposedly heard her scream, and she was washing clothes down at Glenade Loch, and he came to her aid. When he got there, she was already dead with a Dobarku upon her bloody and mutilated body. The man killed the animal, stabbing it in the heart. As it died, it made a whistling noise, and its mate arose from the loch. Its mate chased the man, but after a long and bloody battle, they were saying it loch on the show today, but he killed it as well. So he killed both of the Dobarku.
Right.
And they put the likeness on her headstone. I mean, folks, if you want to dig more into these, there are more. And like I showed you at the beginning, yeah, there it is. At the beginning, there are more mythical beasts and cryptids than we could cover in one show. But we're going to close out the show today, Tim is, with a story that was passed down through generations.
Right. Now, Tom, like you, I was always told that we were part Irish. Let's make this very clear. And so my uncle, my dad's brother, has done a huge amount of genealogy in the last probably 30 years. In fact, my family comes from, and hopefully I'm going to be able to pronounce this correctly, it's Roscommon, and sometimes called Roscommon County in Ireland. and that's the Warbeck clan. And the Warbeck clan will eventually marry into, or years before, somewhere along the way, marries into the same family as now I'm going to forget his name from Braveheart, the main character there. Somebody will be able to tell me his name.
I can't think.
William Wallace.
Yeah, Wallace.
Right. At some point or another, the two clans actually, the Wallaces and the Warbecks become one clan. Eventually, they marry in with the Shepherds, but that's not until they get to the United States. And the Shepherds are actually from England. And so you can imagine the stuff that is going on in the background. But we have family crests from both the Warbecks and the Wallaces and all kinds of neat things that we have gotten over the years. And so my grandmother would always tell us neat stories about her great grandfather, would be my great grandfather. I never knew him. She knew him as a child, and remembers him very, very well, and would describe who he was. He would be the last family member to actually live in the Warbeck Castle in Roche County, or in Roscommon County there. So he's the last family member that is there. What happens is, according to family lore, there were actually 3 spirits that occupied the house. One was a little boy that was dressed all in gray. He would run through the hallways laughing. Which I always thought was interesting, because it's like, I always thought it was neat. Here's this little kid running back and forth laughing, and nobody knew why. Another was actually what I think was a residual haunt. It was just a family member that was sitting in the grand room by the fire. They would gather for, family would all gather in one place, and they'd all go into the grand room, and here'd be this deceased family member sitting in his seat where he had been designed. This is my family's seat. I get to sit here. I'm still the oldest, whether or not, at that point he was aged the oldest. There is a footman that would actually be killed about the same time period as shortly before my grandfather, my ancestor leaves the home. And he was actually killed by a carriage that was coming through the gates at the bottom of the hill. For decades, this one fascinated me as well. For decades, he would actually stand there and he would look towards the top of the hill where the castle was, very forlornly. And according to the stories, whenever he would try to go up to the castle, he could never get past a certain spot. And then he would just reappear exactly where he had been hit by the carriage.
Wow.
And I was like, I was thinking about that, as you're looking at the pictures here. I do have a couple pictures of these. This is actually taken by my cousin John from the 2 different angles here. The gates at the bottom of the hill are gone, but you can actually get the 2 different angles of it that are sitting up atop the hill still. Where the carriage path was, I have no idea.
Well, I wonder if those ghosts are still there.
That's a good question. I'd like to know that too. It's okay, fantastic. The family does eventually leave Ireland, and the reason that they leave is that it's been probably about 150 years ago now. When I first typed this up, I was thinking 100 years ago, and then I got to thinking, no, Grandma was 97 when she died 3 years ago. Wow. So it couldn't possibly be that close. So it has to be further out. And she was not the oldest member of her family. Let's make it clear. Wow. She had a sister that died at 99. She was 5 months away from her 100th birthday when she passed here just last year. So, I mean, they long living families. So it just really kind of, as I was thinking through times, it has to be at least 150 years ago. By my best guess, there was an eerie creature that started appearing on the grounds of the castle itself. And they said that it looked like a horse, that it was a very large black horse that stood at least 8 feet tall, that skin just hung off it like rags, and that it had eyes like fire. And they discovered it was like the skin was just draped over it. It wasn't actually, on it. It was just there. It was kind of an odd description that I always wanted to sit down and try and draw it. And I'm not a great artist, but I'm always thinking, that'd be kind of neat to try and draw whatever the description that she had, because she said it just hung off like rags, that it was like, towels just draped over, a clothesline or something.
Okay, Dagny, are you listening? Dagny, if you're watching, get that description down.
Right. They said that it would come every night for nearly 2 years to the castle grounds. It
Wow.
would wander the grounds. It had a strange cry that echoed off the stone structure, and it was described as a mix between a woman screaming and a lion's roar. Um,
Holy
there were
cow.
also multiple fires that appeared during that 2 years too. Just about every place that the horse was seen, they would have a small fire that would catch in that area.
Wow.
Within a couple days of it appearing, it may have been that it appeared at the same spot. I always ask Grandma, was it the same spot every night until the fire started, or she didn't know. Of course, her
Yeah.
memories were as a child. And this was probably she was probably in her. I want to say she had to be at least her 60s or 70s before she started telling me these things. Um,
Wow.
so,
Cool.
on the last night that it appears, the castle itself burns completely, with a lot of the stone and wood of the structure being destroyed. She told me that there were actually two members of the family and at least four servants of the castle that died that night in the blaze.
Oh my
The fire
goodness.
started in multiple rooms of the castle. Now, it would be my great 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 grandfather never sees the creature again, but he does immigrate to the United States the next year. Like after the
Uh,
fire occurs, he's here in the United
he's
States.
like, I'm
In
done.
fact, right, the first place he goes is to Connecticut, so we know exactly where he
Okay.
is when he arrives in the United States.
Wow.
So to me, it was always fascinating because it's like, I tell people, people ask me, well, what's your family lineage? Well, I'm Irish, I'm Scottish, I'm English, and I'm German. And I can prove all of those. I said, but we've got
Wow.
family crests from two leading clans from the Scottish and the Irish.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's like I tell people I'm a Heinz 57. I've probably got every race
Right.
in me. I don't know. I don't know. All right. Well, final thoughts, guys. Lewis?
Well, it just goes to show how when you see how this mythology is sometimes translated into American mythology, it's very
Right.
interesting to see these creatures in the old country that somehow end up getting translated
Yep.
into our own mythology.
Right.
Exactly. Tim,
Yeah,
final thoughts?
I think you're right, Lewis. I think there is so much more that we could explore on this because, like
Oh,
you,
yeah.
John, when I was looking, there were hundreds of creatures, and I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
wow. So I was like, it's interesting to see all the lore that is there, especially
Mhm.
for such a small country, because they really, size wise, are not very big at
Right.
all. But the number of cryptids,
Oh,
because
God.
I think this horse creature that was there was a cryptid of some kind. It may have been a cryptid that was summoned to be there.
It
That's
could
what I
be.
think there. But
Exactly.
but yeah, I mean, it's like there's a lot of them out there. So
Well, I mean, we didn't go into the vampires or the Irish
right,
werewolves. They got
right,
some cool ones there. And one we kept coming across, well, not in this research, but it's like we keep coming across headless horsemen. I don't
right.
know what's up with that. I mean, every other show or so, we come across a headless horseman. So we're
There
putting a
was
headless
one in the
horseman on our
research that
list.
I was doing, and I was like, we'll push that off to the side for a little while.
Exactly. I mean, like I said, we came across a headless horseman in
Right.
Ireland mythology. So, and I know it came up in a previous show just this year, one of the latest shows, if y'all remember. But anyway,
Yeah.
we've got so much. There's so much here, folks. But we're going to call it a day at this one. But thank you for being here. Is there anyone here with us? Did you hear that? Can you tell us your name? All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Lewis. You guys were awesome as usual. But we're going to have to call it a day there. Be safe on your strange journeys. See you next trip. Bye bye.
Yes.